This week, faith gets real for our three main characters. The writer of the story, as we've sort of talked about, is sort of keeping hidden the fact that God's at work, and our characters make some serious faith decisions this week. How do you go at making decisions? How do you go at making big faith decisions? Risky decisions? Where does faith get real for you? Is it when you're at work and conversations drift onto spiritual things with non-Christian people there? Is it around money decisions? Is it about inviting someone into your home? Are you in that part of your life where you're looking for a partner and faith gets real as you become vulnerable with another person to trust or not? You see, many people say that Ruth's story is a love story, and in many ways it is, but it's not a Western love story or a Hollywoodized love story. It's an ancient Near East love story, and some of that we need some cultural adjustment. I think I mentioned earlier that often in those times marriages weren't done because of love. Marriages were arranged often because of family, the family name, or providing security for women or children, and provision and protection for people. Not to say that love didn't follow that. Often it did, and it wasn't just a cold, calculated process. There was, if you've had any dealing with how organised marriages work, there is input from people in that as well. But imagine trusting your parents to find the right one. How do you go at trusting God when you make decisions and choices? As a parent making a choice for your child, imagine what that would have been like. That would be a significant faith decision. So let's briefly look at these three main characters and see what we can learn about making faith decisions today. So as we look, Boaz and Ruth are coming together, but there's someone who's arranging that to go to the next level. Naomi is arranging this. She's the driving force that is at work bringing Ruth and Boaz together. And as it says, her main driving force behind that for Ruth as a widow, a young widow, is for her to find a family for where she would be provided for. There is probably a sense of the continuation of her husband's name, Elimelech, and the land that they had. But her main motivation is love for Ruth. And I think as we make decisions, are our decisions motivated by love? She has seen that, Naomi has seen that Boaz has been accepting Ruth as a Moabitess. She's still allowed to glean on his property, where maybe other people may not have been as accepting as he was. She makes her decision based out of some wisdom of knowing who Boaz is and what he is like. She makes decisions based on the sovereignty of God, because she knows that it is not by chance that Ruth happened to glean in Boaz's property. And so she can keep in step with this idea that God is sovereign over her faith decision-making. That's why she's back in Bethlehem. That's why she is getting food beyond compare. Like when you heard from Carol that they were in famine. Now, as you've been following through this story, there's more and more food that's generously being supplied for them. Ruth is written with a bit of sort of controversy. There is lots of sexual innuendo and tension written into the book of Ruth. It was the time of Judges, and people pretty well did what they wanted. And most often, women suffered because of that. And some of the language in the earlier chapters about Ruth being harmed in the field is very sexualized language, that she would be molested or raped or abused. And in chapter 3, this language ramps up. It sounds like that the end of harvest parties are pretty full-on parties, and that the threshing floor is not the dance floor where all the action happens, but it's where pretty unwholesome stuff occurs. That dance floor thing didn't work, did it? No. The threshing floor was not a good place. All sorts of stuff happened at the end of the harvest. And Naomi makes the decision to send Ruth there. Not only that, I want you to dress up and perfume yourself and then head on down to the threshing floor at night. That is a rather risky faith decision to make. And so then she gives him instructions, or gives Ruth instructions as to what to do there. And it's full of all sorts of possibilities that could happen to Ruth in that situation, but also what happens if Boaz rejects or misunderstands the move that is going to happen? I wonder even, and people write about this, whether Naomi actually knew about the other Redeemer that Boaz later mentions. And then what happens if he decides to know, there's someone else? Faith risks and making decisions to step towards God are not always easy. They're not always pain-free. And somehow we learn to trust God's character and love in the midst of them. As we take risks, relying on a sovereign God, we seek wisdom of a collective group. We take steps of vulnerability, trusting that God is over all and through all and in all. How are you going at making faith risk decisions? Let's have a look at Ruth and see what we can learn from her. She's the one who has probably the most skin in this game. She is the one, as we've mentioned, has got significant risk of physical harm coming her way. And here she is, picture her sneaking around the activities of the threshing floor, probably freaking out, possibly considering the humiliations that may come her way. Her reputation is on the line. What happens if Boaz rejects her offer? And as we've been saying, the author of Ruth particularly paints a black background in order for these main characters to shine. And that's what Ruth does in this chapter. She shines as Boaz will call her, a woman of noble character. In the backdrop of depravity, she shines with holiness and purity. Why? Because first she trusts her mother-in-law, then she makes a faith trust decision to trust Boaz, but most of all, she trusts Yahweh. She trusts that God is going to be over this and protect her in it. Because I think it actually is indicated in here that she does trust. Why? Because she goes a step further than what her mother-in-law directed. She actually makes a marriage offer to Boaz. That bit where she uncovers his feet and then takes the covering and puts it over her is basically an invitation of marriage. Somewhere Ruth has an intrinsic faith that can drive her to take a risk like that. That idea of being covered under God's wing So the language, the original language, when she takes the wing of his garment and covers her. Listen to this in Ezekiel 16. Later on, I passed by, and when I looked at you, I saw that you were old enough for love. I spread out the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. This is the way God speaks of his people. This is the love that motivates God. God's sovereignty in that. I think we almost capture in that sort of language a vulnerability of God. To trust that his people would respond in faith. And so God's love story is being told through this story. It says that Ruth does not go after the younger men. She follows Boaz, who throughout the course of this story we get the sense that he's much older than her. And again, why would that be risky? It's a risky move to go after an older man. A young widow after an older man. Why? Because it's probably likely that he's going to die before her and that she's going to be a widow again. Or what if he's beyond the age of bearing children? And yet, somehow, she remains faithful in her decision to follow her mother-in-law and to follow Yahweh's sovereign leading to this man. And she shines in this salacious affair as she takes this bold step. Where might you want to take, or are you needing to take faith risk steps this year? Where do you need to act in holiness and obedience? The way that you treat others, the way you use your finance, the way you view your sexuality. Trusting God and not the way of the world. Because our times are not too dissimilar to this. Everyone doing what they would want. How's your purity in the way that you speak about others? How is your generosity? As we trust in a sovereign God, are we willing to risk a few things this year? I know that often when it comes to these things, I can be a bit risk averse and I can actually take steps to protect myself. And this story reminds me to trust a sovereign God and take some risk faith steps again this year. Boaz, like Ruth, also shines in this compromising situation. He is a man of character, and yes, he does not get drunk and he does not sleep with Ruth. There's lots of writing about what actually happens in and around there, but I think it's actually the intent of the author to show a stark contrast of the way of the world and the way that the main characters operate in this story. Their faithful obedience shines. You see, people notice when you take faith risks. People may even say, what's their story? Why do they do that? Why are they different? Why would they make such life decisions? And then before you know it, you have opportunity to tell your story. How is it that people can be so positive in the midst of the loss of a child or the loss of a husband? What is it that gives them strength to carry through those times? And Boaz here again shines. As no doubt he had a sleepless night through this night. No doubt that he was crying out to God to help him to work out where to go with this, knowing of this other Redeemer. And so the chapters finishes, in a sense, on the edge of our seats. We're not sure what's going to happen. Is Boaz going to be able to sort it out? If you've been around church, you know where the story goes and how it gets sorted out. But when you first read it, there's some stuff in here that's leading you to think about that. And we know, and I'm going to pick up this next week, that Boaz is like a Christ-like figure who does save Naomi and Ruth and give them a hope for a future. So Boaz, Naomi and Ruth trust the real hero of this story, which is God himself. And God's big story of love is being woven together through this story and continues to be woven together through our stories today. Even for those who are enemies of God. Because remember, Ruth was a Moabitess, and God shows her exceeding love and grace. So in God's sovereignty, as you head again into 2023, what areas of your life may God be asking you to take some risks with this year? That maybe like Naomi, despite her loss, her pain and her suffering, that maybe he's asking you to risk, keep trusting him in your current circumstance. Maybe like Ruth, who puts herself out there, who listens and obeys, that God wants you to make some obedience decisions this year. And maybe like Boaz, who shines with respect and generosity, who puts his reputation on the line, maybe he's asking you to risk showing generosity and respect and hospitality to those that you wouldn't normally this year. In a world where everyone does what they want, how might you act faithfully following Yahweh this year? Where may you need to trust God this week? Where is God calling you to obey him at this moment? Where are the people around you to help and walk and process those decisions? What faith risk stories may you have to tell at the end of this year? Amen.